All right, so here's our first lecture for NHM 441 online. We're going to go ahead and go over the food service industry and trends today. This is not a short lecture, but it's not too bad. Hopefully I won't bore you all to death. All right, so if we were to go ahead and just look at, I have chapter 1 over here. We're not actually using a book, so just disregard the chapter 1. We're just going to look at an overview of the food service industry, and you should be able to understand the difference between commercial and non-commercial operations, and describe attributes of the food service industry and functions of different food service associations, and then differentiate between chain, franchise, and independent operations. And finally, we're going to examine historic food service trends, because you're going to need to, with your group, project trends for the upcoming year. All right, so first, if we go ahead and look at this hierarchical chart, I can't even get that out, of the tourism industry, you can see that tourism or travel tourism is like an umbrella. And under that umbrella, we've got the hospitality industry and other attributes of tourism. We've got transportation services, and we've got destinations. And destination alternatives actually could be anything from, say, Jamaica to a city like Savannah or Charleston. And actually now even destinations are being branded the same way that hotels are being branded, and the same way that restaurants and other hospitality operations are being branded. So we're just a piece of the entire travel tourism industry, food service operations. Okay, so how do we categorize food service operations? The first way is determining if they're commercial or non-commercial. So what is a commercial and what is a non-commercial operation? A commercial operation is going to be for profit. A non-commercial operation is not for profit. It's the easiest way to differentiate the two. So if we were to look at an example being a prison, or a hospital a lot of times, or employee dining. Those are non-commercial operations, and really their goal is to service the clientele at a predetermined price per meal or price per guest. And then commercial operations are the ones that are in competition to stay alive, and are like all the restaurants on the square, and restaurants chains and things like that. So can we have both commercial and non-commercial operations under one roof? And the answer is yes. If we were to look at a casino as an example, a casino is going to have the employee dining, where they're taking care of their internal guests, and they do that by determining or budgeting how much per guest they're going to charge as a benefit. And then they have all of the outlets from the resort side that are for profit. So we can even see that in hospitals, where hospitals are going to go ahead and take care of the patients, but then again they're going to have a commercial operation for the families of patients that come into the hospital. All right, so chains. What are some examples of chains? You know, there's different criteria based on what a chain is. Is it 3 or more restaurants of the same type? Is it 4 or more? I'm not really worried about that. When you see chain, I want you to think of things like Olive Garden and Red Lobster, and in town we have Chili's. We used to have Applebee's, and then we could even go down to quick service, and we can look at Panera and Five Guys and things like that. Those are chains. And there's a lot of advantages of chains. You know, one is because you have a whole bunch of units and a whole bunch of cash flow, you can usually get cash and credit pretty easily. You can go ahead and experiment without risk of damaging your reputation or your operation. And a lot of chains will have markets where they test them. You know, McDonald's always tests new products in the Orlando and Chicago markets, for example. And they feel like that's middle America, and if they'll work well in Chicago and they work well in the Orlando markets, then they go ahead and expand it slowly to others. So if you're a single unit restaurant and you decide you want to change part of your menu, it could be a do or die for you. It could actually deter all of your guests from coming back and kill your business. And the other thing is that when you're working in chains, you've got a lot of other restaurants that have the same exact operational challenges that you have. So you can go ahead and compare financials and talk shop and find ways to save money or to become more productive. And then, of course, the disadvantage is the more people, the more levels, the more lines that you have in any business, the more bureaucratic it becomes. So in a smaller restaurant operation, if the owner decides he wants to put pork tenderloin on the menu, he can go ahead and just buy a case of pork tenderloin. He can go ahead and write it on a chalkboard and it's on the menu. Or at least it's being served and it could be on the menu very shortly. In a chain, it's going to have to go through the whole R&D process. It's going to have to go through marketing. It's going to have to go through financial management to determine the optimal cost and selling price. And procurement's going to have to determine if they can procure, I guess is a good enough word, enough product for the entire chain. So a new menu item could take 6 months from idea to actually execution. All right, then we have franchises. So franchises can be changed. You could have a chain that's a franchise. An example of that would be Chick-fil-A in town. The Chick-fil-A here is a franchise. The advantages are that you've got a proven concept and you've got people who are going to help you start up the operation. McAllister's actually has their entire restaurant on 2 pallets. So if you go ahead and you sign up for a McAllister's franchise, they're going to help you find the location. Once you find the location, they're going to send a truck out there with 2 pallets. They're going to forklift them off the truck, and then you're going to open the pallets, and in those pallets is everything you need to open your McAllister's, from signage, from tables and chairs, from equipment to ladles. It's all there. They've got it down to where within 30 days of signing a franchise agreement, you can have a restaurant open if everything falls in place. And the day that you open your doors and you put your sign up, everybody knows McAllister's, so you've got name recognition. Hopefully your products are the same as other McAllister's throughout the concept or the market. And ideally, it's a proven concept, so the profitability is proven. Now, the disadvantages are that most franchises work on a percentage of sales, and that means that the franchisee may be losing money, but the franchisor is making money. So the contracts favor the franchisor. Chick-fil-A is a little bit different of a model where the franchisor gets 50% of profits. And that may sound like a lot, but when you're talking about 5% of sales or 7% of sales, it ends up being more than 50% of profits by the time your flow-through dollars get to the bottom line. And the other disadvantage is if you decide you're going to be a Chick-fil-A, there's no variance on what you serve. You can't go ahead and make your own special chicken sandwich and put it on the menu or put it on a chalkboard out front. If you're a Chick-fil-A, you can't open on Sundays. You've got to go ahead and adhere to the operational requirements, and you can't vary from those or they will pull your franchise. All right, and then we have independents. And examples of independents would be almost every restaurant on the square. And now we've got Gus's there, and Gus's is a franchise. And we're going to have Moe's Barbecue, and Moe's will be a franchise. So we're actually going to have a couple of unique franchise operations on the square. But, all of John's Currence's operations are independent. Ajax Diner's independent. We can go on and on. Bourre's John Currence. I meant Bacchus. They're all independents. What's some advantages? You can walk in tomorrow and decide that you're going to change your entire operation. You can go ahead, and I think that Bacchus is changing their entire concept now to a breakfast operation in that unit, and they're going to move Bacchus over to another building. You can't do that if you're a franchise, a chain, any of those things. But the disadvantage is that you've got to stand on your own. If there's one restaurant, that one restaurant has to be profitable. It has to be profitable day in and day out, or else you're threatened of not being in business anymore. So even though you've got the luxury of making decisions, and you've got the ability to and the flexibility to change with the market, you do have the challenge of only one cash flow uh, to sink or swim by. All right, so now we're going to shift gears to industry trends. Here's 3 links that I've used throughout the years to research industry trends. And when I say industry trends, I'm talking about food and beverage trends or restaurant trends. And when I say food and beverage, it could be alcohol, it could be non-alcohol. When I say food, it's every aspect of food. Every student always asks me about the trends. Can you give me a template for this presentation? And my answer is always the same. No, I've given you information, examples of 2 trends. You can go ahead and get online and find out how other people do trends. This is a senior class. I'm giving you a broad-based project, and I want you to go ahead and run with it. You can focus on any aspect of the industry you want. You can focus on every aspect of the industry. But the goal is that you go ahead and determine what your final product's going to be. Okay, so what's a trend? A trend is something that is new and upcoming that has not become mainstream. So when we look at trends, we'll talk about, first of all, 2011. Let's look at some of these and we can talk about if it's still kind of a trend or if it's becoming mainstream or what happened to it. So pies were big in 2010. We had pot pie restaurants coming up where they were doing chicken pot pies and beef pot pies, and then they were doing sweet pies. I don't see any of those restaurants anymore, really. They're big in Australia, they're big in Europe, but they're not big here. I don't think that this has become mainstream, or it's still a trend. And then the new mom and pop has not really become mainstream. I mean, we still have pop-up restaurants where, as an example, I think St. Leo's did some pop-ups before they opened up. And we've got some restaurants that do a little bit of sharing in town, especially with the mobile food trucks. And that may continue, but it's not mainstream, and it's still kind of trendy, but it's not as trendy as it was in 2011. I think it's just an option of doing business. And I think mobile food trucks are no longer trendy. I think they've become mainstream. So when we start talking about when we were talking in 2011 about mobile food trucks, they were hip, slick, and cool, and they weren't common in all markets. And now they are everywhere. We even had a food truck war in Oxford, Mississippi, a few Sundays ago. All right, one ingredient restaurants. In 2011, we had we had slider restaurants, we had meatball restaurants, we had burger restaurants. Really, with the way competition's going, that's expanded a little bit, and we no longer have one ingredient restaurants as a trend. I think that limited ingredient restaurants are still up and coming, and mini plates are commonplace now. So when we go ahead and look at mini desserts, most restaurants will have many desserts if they're healthful, and every restaurant almost has a slider of some type. You know, at one point, buffalo wings were a trend. Now, buffalo wings are commonplace. Sliders are now commonplace. All right. So, multi-purpose spaces. I think just with the market being tight, we're still going to see a little bit of multi-purpose spaces. I wouldn't call it a trend. I wouldn't call it commonplace, but it's happening. And then we talk about minimal menus. I think that's become commonplace as far as limited descriptions. And this dearth of banding sauces, I don't see that as commonplace. But in 2011, painting the plates with herbs and spices and food was a big hit, and now it's kind of, it is what it is. All right, we're always going to see healthy foods as a trend of some sorts. It could be that the Mediterranean foods, the Asian foods were big, and then we started looking at attributes of those, like tahini and tzatziki, as far as like Mediterranean, became real common flavors. And we had the sriracha, which was not around one year, and then the next year everybody had it, and before you know it, you could get a sriracha sauce at a fast food restaurant for your hamburger. So heart healthy as far as cooking procedures, as far as ingredients, as far as types of meats. I think there will always be some type of heart healthy or heart healthy trend. It's just, what will it be? Will it be a cooking procedure? Will it be ingredients? Will it be a theme, an ethnic theme, or what will it be? Hot dogs and sausage shops in 2011 were big. The challenge with something like that is that anybody can put a hot dog or a sausage on their menu. So the competitive advantage is limited. And that's the way a lot of restaurants or a lot of trends are. Is you may have a slider restaurant as an example that's huge, but then everybody sees that people are going to the slider restaurant, so they decide, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and take the top 2 or 3 sliders I can make, and I'm going to put them on my menu. And before you know it, every restaurant in town is competing against the slider restaurant, but the restaurants that have a broader menu are going to attract more people. So then the niche restaurants like the hot dog restaurants kind of fall by the wayside. Now, as far as farm to table, I think that it's funny, 150 years ago, everything was farm to table. So that was just the way that we procured food. Then we went away from it, and now we're going back to it. And the beauty of farm to table and purchasing local is that it's usually less expensive if it's fresh products. So the sustainability is still an ongoing trend. It's just that we're focusing on different attributes. And the 100-mile diet may not be a trend anymore, but we're still trying to use those philosophies in purchasing, and some people use them in the way that they eat and all that good stuff. All right, I don't see fried vegetables as a trend or as a commonplace. I do see Brussels sprouts as a pretty common vegetable nowadays. As far as soft serve ice creams, it didn't make it, I don't think. And there were restaurants in California that would actually make savory ice cream. So there was a restaurant that had a prime rib that had a horseradish ice cream that went with it. And then finally, high-end junk foods. I don't think that became commonplace either. Going back, if we were going to the next slide, I think that savory popsicles fell through the wayside. I think yogurt is commonplace. Like I said, we're always going to have different international menus or international flavors. I don't think Scandinavian became commonplace. I can't think of any influences from that region of the world that are commonplace on menus. But as far as cooking processes, smoking still is pretty much commonplace. And the hay and grass I don't see, but I do see people using unique woods in their smoking processes, cherries and peach and things like that. All right. I don't think that the bread trend in 2011 became commonplace. And then as far as the ingredients that were trendy, then if you look, a lot of them are common. Pork belly is common. Pimento cheese is common. Hummus is common. Honeys are common. So a lot of them did go from trends to mainstream, but other ones just didn't quite catch on, like the kumquats and the whey. Those just didn't become commonplace. And sometimes trends will stay trends for a long time and then phase out or become, a trend can be a trend for more than 1 year. I just want you to understand that. All right, so now let's jump to 2015. In 2015, the skinny and power theme for female and males was big. We had skinny coffee, we had skinny margaritas, we had a whole skinny line of desserts and even alcohol, and then we had the power stuff for males, the power bowls, the power salads that made eating healthy at some of these quick service and fast food restaurants not a feminine thing. And of course, when you have a power bowl, that doesn't exclude women from buying it, but I don't know that men buy much skinny stuff. And then produce, as far as baby vegetables and even flowers and things like that, was big in 2015. I think healthy foods are always a trend, but I don't think the skinny and power. Maybe the power became commonplace, and I guess we could argue about the skinny, and you may know more about it than me, but I don't think the skinny is commonplace. All right. Now, if we were to look at the ethnic trends, Greek yogurt is now commonplace. As far as ethnic condiments, we're always going to have different ones. Like I said, the sriracha was huge. You know, maybe the wasabi becomes big or something like that. And then the ramen noodles. We have a lot of ramen noodle restaurants. I don't know that it's commonplace, but it sure has increased over the years. And then this veggie chick is what Nancy Cruz called making the vegetables irresistible to guests. And I don't like the veggie chick term. And I don't know that these vegetables have become irresistible to our guests, but a lot of them have found their way on menus, especially the avocados, because of the healthful attributes. And I haven't had a pizza with Brussels sprouts in a long time, so I don't think that that's commonplace. All right. As far as real foods, I think that has become commonplace. You know, it used to be that butter was bad, and then we realized that butter is better than margarine or less unhealthy than margarine, and lard is less unhealthy than margarine. And real milk is good for us, and it has attributes. Eggs are good for us. So the real foods have come back, and they're no longer a trend. I think it's commonplace. And as far as the menu formats, those sure have become commonplace. You can go to a number of chain restaurants, and they have the iPad menus or virtual menus. And I think everywhere, I bet you most of the students in this class have a phone order app for something, if it's pizza or maybe Taco Bell or something like that, where they can pre-order and just go and pick up. So your charge for your group is to do trends for the upcoming year, and that's because we're in August. That's basically 2017/2018. I don't want to know what the trends are right now. I want, based on your insights and on your research, to determine what you think are going to be trends in the upcoming year. Okay, so that's the goal of the project, and we'll talk a little bit more about that via email, or maybe I'll just send out a one-sheet description of the project and the due date. But start thinking about that, and because you're in the online class this semester, your groups are going to come from online students. Thanks.